Hi guys, how you doing? This is Ben, the Real Estate Pro. I recently came across a another YouTube channel. I won't mention them. Not that they're bad. It's just um, uh, they mentioned this particular um, Financial Samurai podcast, and it's a good podcast. They talk about a lot of different types of subjects as far as the financial world. But one interview that was done recently, this was done about a week ago, is they interviewed Michael Ketchmark. And the name of the article, or the podcast, I should say, is called Busting the Real Estate Cartel with Attorney Michael or Mike Ketchmark. And I found it really interesting. Actually, I found it extremely fascinating and very telling. Uh, kind of, one of the things that we want to do since, Mr. Ketchmark is kind of persona non grata amongst real estate agents. I don't think he's that bad, but he's kind of the adversary, okay? Because even though I'm all for changes in the industry, uh, I don't know that I agree with everything that Mr. Ketchmark believes about our industry. As a matter of fact, there's a few aspects I think he's grossly misinformed about. But anyway, I wanted to find out what motivated Michael Ketchmark, and this podcast was very interesting because it kind of went over a little bit of that. And and I'm not going to really go or play too much of that part, but as far as I'm looking at my notes here, um, I, I I believe, or at least he believes, that he's on a crusade. Okay, he believes that NAR is a cartel, and he believes that they have been for a very long time engaged in illegal activity by um, violating uh, the Sherman Antitrust Act, and that they're a cartel. They were price fixing, and there was a conspiracy in order to do that, to price fix and also in turn inflate house prices. He believes that, and a lot of people say, that he's in it just for the money. No, I don't think that he is, or at least he doesn't believe that he's in it just for the money. He actually believes that what he's doing is the right thing. Okay. Now it doesn't matter whether I agree with him or not. It's just I think that's very important because if he is, I don't consider him the enemy, but he's the adversary. And one of the things that you learn in the military is you want to know your enemy, okay, or you want to know your adversary. All right. So that's why I decided to listen to this, and I found it very, very um, like I said, fascinating, I guess would be the best word. But before I get into some of the excerpts of the podcast, and I invite you guys to go and listen to this in its entirety, because I think if you listen to it objectively, I think you can at least gain understanding of his point of view. Whether you agree with it or not is totally up to you. There were some things that I think he made good points on, and I think there were other things where he was completely off. But anyway, the biggest thing I think you have to take from the Sitzer Burnett trial and lawsuit and verdict is, a lot of agents seem to think that it was a contract dispute because they keep talking about, well, these people signed a contract and they agreed to this and they paid this happily, that type of thing. I don't know how someone pays happily sometimes, but anyway, um, but that's not what this lawsuit was about. Really, all of that is kind of irrelevant. Okay, listing agreements are kind of irrelevant in this case. This, like I said, this was a Sherman Antitrust Act suit. Okay, is what this was. It wasn't so much about commissions. It's just the commission structure, this particular method that they were using as far as involving MLS and sharing of commissions. Um, what they were alleging, the plaintiffs were alleging that this was all part of some type of conspiracy, and let's face it, the jury agreed with him, and he did a very good job of getting them to see it his way. So um, now, I want to go ahead and play a few excerpts of this podcast, and I think the first one I wanted. Let me see if I can get down here, and please bear with me because it's the first time I've been doing this, and I'm sure I'll screw this up. But there was a section here where you talked about buyer's agents, and I listened to a news clip of him talking about buyer's agents, and he made the comment that he thought that buyer's agents were awesome. Okay, I think somebody asked him, what do they have against buyer's agent? And he said, I don't have anything against buyer's agents. I think they're awesome. Something to that effect. I'm paraphrasing. I don't know the exact verbiage or the words that he used. But there was a portion here where he mentions buyer's agents. Now, the host of the Financial Samurai podcast is just asking him questions about the case, that type of thing. But I think he says something here that I think is very telling, and I think talks or it. I think it's one of the reasons or one of the things that he believes in his heart that buyer's agents basically shouldn't exist. I'll let him go ahead and tell you. Let me go ahead and press play.
But the reality is that we don't. I mean, buyer's agents are really, by and large, a thing of the past, and it's hard to say it. It's tough to say it because there's a lot of really nice buyer's agents, but look, they just are. And when I first started practicing law back in 1990, 30 some years ago, if I had to travel for work, I would use a travel agent. Remember travel agents?
Yes. Yep.
Sure. And if you wanted to book a plane or a hotel, you'd call a travel agent, and he or she would book a plane for you. They charge you 10%. We don't use it. We use Orbitz, or we use Expedia, or you go directly online. Right. Imagine now if every time you went online, if the National Travel Association sent you a bill. That's what they've done. I mean, that's what they've done. And it's shocking.
So what I found interesting about that is he believes that buyer's agents should exist. And I think that possibly, this is just me speculating here, is that possibly part of his strategy, because you got to remember this, Michael Ketchmark's talking to the DOJ, talking to other, and he says it in this podcast. He's talking to other lawyers around the country. There's obviously a plan here, okay? And I think the effect of the plan is to essentially eliminate buyer's agents. And this is how he feels about. I don't think he has anything against buyer's agents, but I think he believes that the current system that we're using will basically get taken apart, be outlawed or whatever, and buyer's agents just won't exist anymore. He actually talks about it later on. I don't know if I'll be able to play it. I'll have to see if I can find it, where he makes another comment about buyer's agents down the road. But anyway, he's going to talk about now about Australia, which I think is kind of interesting that he brings this up. But I'm going to go ahead and hit play, and we'll go ahead and listen on.
What we did, and I thought it was one of the cooler ideas that we had, my partner Ben Fadler, who's just this brilliant attorney who I work with, and he's got some really he's got real common sense about him. The National Association of Realtors, they did this report. They called it the Danger Report, and they looked around the world where you don't have the MLSs, and they looked and they said, look, we don't have buyer's agents around the world, and they identified Australia as a country where the commissions are between 1.5% and 3%. So Ben and I picked up the phone and we started calling agents in Australia, and we found one of them to come as an expert witness. We flew him to Kansas City, Missouri, and he testified to the jury. And I remember the very first time I talked to him, his name's Todd Reynolds, and he was a great dude. Is a great dude. And I said, hey, I was explaining what we were doing, and he's explaining, well, we don't have buyer's agents in Australia. And he actually asked me, he said, do you not have the internet in Missouri? And he said, we have it. He goes, well, why would you pay somebody to find you a house? Can't you go online and look at videos and do? And so he came to trial and testified to the jury, and they loved him because there's just a better way.
Now, this part I found interesting in that, he seems to, now I'm not saying I'm not reading his mind, but I just find it interesting that he brought up the Australian model, because I've heard about the Australian model for a very long time, and down there they don't have buyer's agents. Basically, you have basically a listing agent. I think that the closest comparison that we would have would probably be something like a dual agency type of scenario. Seems to work down there. I don't know I don't know the pros and cons exactly. I did watch a video of a gentleman that's an agent down there. They seem to like their system, and that could be how we're headed. At least that's what I think. I think that we're going to see a lot of dual agency, or we're going to see dual agency kind of tweaked a bit. Okay. I know that not every state allows for dual agency, but a vast majority of states allow for dual agency, either dual agency or I believe they call it designated brokerage is what some other states allow for. But I think if I remember correctly, I think 42 states allow for dual agency. I think there's 8 that don't, but I think there's 3 of those 8 that allow for designated agency, which are brokerage, which basically means that if you could work with the same brokerage, but you're going to get 2 different agents, but it's the same broker, okay? But you can't be represented by the same agent. So, if this system is already here, this dual agency with its problems, don't get me wrong. I mean, there's liability for brokers. There's all kinds of things to worry about. But if this system already exists in 42 states, I'm going to say 45, or a similar system already exists, I think that's what people are going to gravitate towards. Okay, because me, as if I'm listing a property, I'm advertising to buyers. I'm saying, buyers, call me. Buyers, come look at this house. You know what I mean? If there's buyers agents, that's fine. Okay, but under the proposed system, or at least what I'm thinking is, the buyer's agent's going to have to figure out how to get paid. And there's going to be a lot of buyers that just aren't going to have the money to pay their agents. So, and this is something that I think a lot of agents don't understand, is I think there's a lot of buyers that don't want to hire, but they would rather not hire an agent. Okay, they would rather go directly to the listing broker. Now, as agents, I know that there's pros and cons of that, or there's cons of that. You want to have representation, but you know, it may be possible, and this is something I think agents need to think about, is maybe our services just aren't as valuable to buyers out there as we think it is. No, I think it's valuable. I mean, I'm not going to disagree with anybody as far as that goes. I think it's valuable. But we need to look at things through the lens of our clients, not through the lens of other agents. You know, I heard somebody say the other day, well, we could just get a seller concession from, a seller concession from the seller on a deal, and then my client could use, or the buyer could use that to pay my commission. What makes you think that the buyer is going to use that to pay your commission? Maybe they'll want to use it to pay their closing costs, and maybe they just won't hire a buyer's agent. Ever think about that? We are just so used to this paradigm that there are a lot of agents that just can't think outside of it. It's just like I've said this in other videos, just like I've had these industry quote unquote experts, real estate experts that came on and said, well, they're going to be, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac are going to go ahead and make it possible for people to go ahead and finance this in their loan. Why, even if, let's just say that they did, which I think was insane, but let's just say that they did. Why would a buyer do that? Why would a buyer increase their loan amount, increase their payment, possibly increase their interest rate, because LTV, or loan to value, unnecessarily, when they can just go directly to the listing agent and deal with that listing agent and get representation that way? I mean, it's done all the time today. Why would a buyer spend, I guess it depends on where you live, but why would a buyer spend potentially tens of thousands of dollars, okay, when they could just not pay any of it and go directly to a listing agent? Can anyone answer that question for me? Or is it just a question that maybe us agents just don't want to think about, because what it does is it minimizes our importance in a real estate transaction. Okay? There's no such thing as your commission. Okay? The only thing that exists is the services that you can provide to your client that you can be compensated for. There's no such thing as your commission. It doesn't belong to you until you've rendered services and been paid for it. You should never take it for granted, and unfortunately there are just too many agents out there that do that. But anyway, I digress. Um, so, I just found it interesting that he would talk about the Australian model, and how there, people can just look up houses on the internet. And I think what a lot of agents don't want to admit is that I heard the statistic that 70% of people look on websites like Realtor.com and Zillow when they're looking for a house. Okay? I'll admit I do too. If I want to find out some information about a house, I just go to Zillow. I see what they might be looking at as far as value. Maybe it's for sale. So I look there. There's some basic information about the property, as far as taxes, square footage, a little bit of history about the property, pictures on the property. It's all right there. When I have clients, a lot of times they'll contact me about a property that just came on the market that they want to go look at. And do you know where they go to look? They go to Zillow, or they go to Realtor.com. A lot of them don't even use the links that I used to send them through the MLS. You know what I mean? Because they have to go to their email, they have to click on it. It's just a lot easier just to go to a website. Okay? So, anyways, the Australian model I think is kind of interesting. And then I'm going to skip forward to another portion here, which I thought was kind of interesting. But let's listen a little bit more. Let's just go ahead. I wasn't going to do this, but I think it's interesting.
There's just a better way. And
Right.
It's no knock against buyer's agents, but it's like feeling sorry for the people who used to sell me movies at Blockbuster. I mean,
Right.
they have
Times
to move
change.
areas. I mean, and if somebody wants to go and spend, and Missouri houses aren't as expensive as they are around the rest of the country, but on average, houses here, $300,000 house, a $9,000 commission. And we reviewed 130,000 transactions over a 7-year time period in the Kansas City area. 98.2% of them were at 3% buyer's commission. I mean, that is stunning evidence of price fixing.
Now that goes along with what I said earlier, because I think it's interesting. Now, I'm not necessarily saying it's proof of price fixing, but it certainly could be seen that way, that no matter where you go in the United States, no matter what area you go to buy a house and you look, it's all 5 or 6% commission. Okay? And that's what he kind of alluded to in that particular spot. I'm glad that I hit play, because I forgot about that part. I did mean to play, but I would have missed it had I not just hit play. Now, another portion that I think is kind of interesting, and it's an argument that I hear a lot. Well, let's see. It says unlabeled load to media, but let me see if I can let me see if I can get it to reload here. Technical difficulties, folks. There we go.
I just think it's a bunch of scary.
Hold on one second here.
You get up to us. That's why they had 200 sell me movies at Block.
So I'm trying to get to a portion where they're talking about the host asked him a question about
that's why they're
about who pays the commission. This is something that I've heard different people, even agents, have different varying opinions on it. And I'll go ahead and put in my 2 cents here. But I want to go ahead and play this, which I think the host of the show says something or presents the perspective that the buyers is paying the commission. I'll go ahead and let it play. I don't want to. Sometimes I get into the habit of saying it before it's said. So I'll let him go and say it.
For doing it.
Let me ask you this. I think you make a great point regarding people not familiar with buying and selling homes, maybe twice in their lifetime. So they're
Let me explain that real quick. So there's a portion of the interview where he talks about how one of the reasons why a lot of people don't pay attention to what's been going on with this illegal activity, quote unquote, illegal activity, is because buyers and sellers they don't buy or sell a house all the time. I mean, they might do it once or twice in their entire lifetime. So that's what he's talking about.
scared to do the wrong thing. They're scared to have a stale fish listing. They're scared to lose money. Do buyers not know that the 2.5 to 3% commission the buyer's agent earns is really the 2.5 to 3% of money out of their own pocket, because they could have negotiated a lower price because
No,
if they didn't have that commission.
no. In fact, what they do is the National Association of Realtors and these real estate companies forever, they were training agents, buyers agents, to tell buyers it's free. It's free.
Mm.
If you go on Zillow and well, people don't even know this. But if you go on Zillow right now, go on Zillow.com.
I'm gonna go ahead and pause it there. But this is what I find interesting about that particular section. Okay, and it's something I hear a lot about. That buyers are the ones that actually pay the commissions because they're the ones that are bringing the funds to the table, and those are the funds that are being used to distribute, paying for certain things. Well, there's a couple of problems with that theory. Okay, I'm not saying it's wrong. It's just that argument doesn't ring 100% true with me, and here's the reason why. Number one, yes, it is true that the buyer brings the funds. That is 100% true. However, they don't control who it goes to. The seller does. Okay? So, under the current format of how real estate commissions are paid, the seller is the one that really dictates the percentage. Okay? Now, there's a whole other lawsuit that's going on. I believe it's the buyer lawsuit. I think it's called Baton 2. I believe, and please correct me if I'm wrong, and I apologize if I am, but that's the buyer lawsuit where they're alleging that the buyer never got to negotiate that portion of the commission. But anyway, under the current format, it's the seller that gets that says this is what I'm paying and who I'm paying it to. Okay, so that's point number one. Now that doesn't necessarily disprove what this particular theory or this particular way of thought that buyers pay for everything. They're the ones that pay in the commission. But let me introduce something to think about, and then I would like for somebody to maybe try and change my mind, or maybe get me to look at it a different way. So what you're doing in a real estate transaction is you're exchanging property. Okay, one's real property, a home, and then that's you're just exchanging that house for another type of property, which we'll call currency in this case. It's still property. Okay, so if you look at it from that standpoint, let's say that you're trading houses. Let's say that you have a buyer, or a buyer who wants one property, and you have the seller, quote unquote, of one property, and they decide to swap properties. Okay, so you're exchanging two equal properties. Okay, let's say the equal amount of square footage, equal price. Let's say you're changing that. Well, that'd be more like a trade, would it not? Okay, who's paying the commission then? Who's in contract to pay the commission in that case? Well, wouldn't that be the seller? Would the seller have to come out of pocket in order to pay that commission to the agents? Something to think about. Now, that's a little bit extreme. Let's take a different example. Let's say that you have a seller, they're selling a house, and the buyer comes and says, "I would like to go ahead and pay you, but I'm going to pay in gold. Gold bars equal to the amount of the sales price." Okay? So now you have two essentially pieces of property, one being real property, one being personal property, and you're exchanging those two things. Well, I would ask you, who's paying the commission in that case? Could you say the buyer's paying the commission? Well, he's not paying the commission because, well, he's not bringing. Is he not paying the commission because he's not bringing cash? Who has to liquidate that property and pay the commissions in that particular case? Wouldn't that be the seller? Does the buyer have any say in who gets what in that particular case? Well, no, because the seller dictates that. Okay, and isn't there an exchange of goods prior to commissions being exchanged or being paid out? Okay, isn't that what's happening here? You're just trading one product or one thing for another. It just so happens to be cold hard cash in most cases in exchange for the house, but isn't property being exchanged prior to a commission being paid? So then you have to ask the question, well, then who's paying the commission? Right? So I guess it depends on which way you look at it. Me personally, it doesn't make a lot of sense to me that even though, see, the buyer is exchanging cash for the property. Okay? So we have a swap of property. So the buyer gets the property. He gives the funds over to the seller. The seller takes those funds and pays the commissions. So to me, the seller is the one that pays the commissions. They're the ones that have the power to do it. They're the ones that set how much it is. I mean, you could make the argument, if you really thought about it, you could make the argument that your boss or your employer pays your house payment. Well, you could. They're the ones that provided the funds, correct? Yes, they deposited into your account, but couldn't you say that if you use the same logic? But no, see, you exchanged your labor for that money. Does your employer control where that money goes, who you're going to pay it to? Whether you pay your rent or whether you pay your car payment, whether you pay this bill, pay that bill, do they do that? I don't know. I don't think so. I think that because you have that trade of what you have deemed as equal, two things of equal value, the currency along with the house, I think the seller actually pays the commission because they're the ones that set the commission. They're the ones that agreed to pay the commission, and they're the ones and it's their bank account that it's coming out of, and the buyer got what they wanted. They got the house. And I don't think personally that it's baked in to the price. But anyway, I'll go on. I digress. But I'll go ahead and continue with this.
And do a search. And it populates in Kansas City, it'll populate 7,000 houses are for sale. Every single house on Zillow is a house that's part of this system because the National Association of Realtors has a rule. It's called no commingling. When Zillow or these aggregators like Realtor.com or Zillow, when they or Trulia, when they get that information, the only way they'll feed it to them is that they refuse to put it in there with for sale by owners or people who are not members of NAR. So when you then click on that, you click on a house in Zillow, and then you go to an agent, and the agent says, "I'm not going to charge you anything." You think this is the greatest deal ever. But you're right. It's baking it into the cost of the house because if I'm trying to net out a house of a $300,000 house, I'm willing to pay $9,000 for seller's commission, but I'm trying to net out $290,000. If I didn't have to pay the buyer's commission, I'd drop the cost of my house.
Right. Or everybody wins. You
Everyone
drop it a
will.
little, the buyer saves a little, the agent still earns this listing, fee of 2.5, 3%.
Or
Now that part, I don't know how anyone can say that or have that thought with a straight face. So the idea here is if a seller didn't have to pay a buyer's commission, they would just go ahead and lower the price of the house. Because if they want to net a certain amount, well, I only want to net, and me, yeah, I do this all the time, right? If I want to net a certain amount on something, and I'm like, well, you know what? I've got somebody and I want to net a couple grand on this sale, but I got somebody that will pay me 3 grand. Well, oh no, I'll go ahead and lower my price. That's ridiculous. I'm I'm being facetious here, guys. Guys, who in their right mind? Let me take a step back. I think in general, and I think it's reasonable for anybody to think that people want, when they sell anything, I don't care what it is, in most cases, for a vast majority of people, when they sell something, they want what it's worth. They just want what it's worth. If your house is worth 400,000, and you have an appraisal or you have an agent do a BPO or whatnot, if it's worth 400,000, that's what you want. I mean, do you really care that much about, you know, what the commissions are, or, does that have that big of an effect on what you can and can't get out of a house? Now, don't get me wrong. I know that there are certain instances where you don't have a lot of equity in the house. Um, and sometimes that agent commission can make a big difference. I get it. Okay, but you can always sell your house on your own, or you can sell it with a flat rate broker, or you can negotiate a different commission in that particular case. But what I found hilarious here is that he's saying that if sellers didn't have to pay a buyer's commission, they would just go ahead and lower the price of their house. No one would do that, okay? Because people want what their property is worth. Now, does that add a little flexibility? Meaning, if someone comes in with a little lower offer, or if they come in with some seller concession that you can go, well, you know what? Yeah, I mean, I got a little more room to work with, right? Okay, valid argument. Let's say that you were selling a classic car. Let's say this classic car is worth $50,000, but you know you need new tires on the car. Okay? So you look on eBay, compare it, and you go, you know what? This car is just like it, or selling for 50 grand. That's what I'm going to list at. But I need to put new tires on the car. Let's just say that you're going to spend, say you get some really nice tires, right? Let's just say that you're going to spend about $1,500 for the tires on the car. Okay, so you go, okay, I'm going to go spend $1,500, but you go down to the tire store and find out they're having 50% off sale. So those $1,500 tires that you were thinking about getting, you can get those for $750. Pretty good deal, huh? So you get the tires put on the car, you bring it home, and you're getting ready to list the car, and then do you sit there and think, oh well, the tires only cost me $750 instead of $1,500? And I know that I could, that all other cars like mine or like this one, they sell for 50 grand. But I'm going to lower the price of my car by $750 right now. Nobody does that. I mean, you could, but nobody does that. I find this particular section or this comment of this particular podcast comical. Okay, absolutely ridiculous. I, I would advise you, if my client told me that, I would advise him, hey, look, why don't we just go ahead and stick with our price, put it on the market, and see what the market says before we start putting any discounts on the property, because that's That's what's important. What does the market say? Okay, what does that say that our property is worth? Because that ultimately is what you're going to sell the house for. Why would you lower the price of the house less than what the property is worth just because you saved a little money? No, you're going to want to put that money in your pocket. Okay, and that's what the average person is going to do. So this portion, I don't know, I chuckle, I laugh. I understand the logic. I mean, I understand kind of the point of view that yes, you can, and you can do that. You can lower the price of the house by that amount if you want to. I'm just saying you're not going to automatically do that for no reason. I mean, would you? For no reason? Just go ahead because, maybe you thought that the house was worth 350,000 and all of a sudden someone tells you, "Hey, you know what? We did a BPO on the house. It's worth 400,000." Well, you're going to ask 400,000. Okay? And a buyer's commission isn't going to have anything to do with it. Okay? Buyer's commission isn't going to dictate whether you're going to raise the price or lower the price. Now, it's a factor. Yes. Absolutely. And could it come into play? Absolutely, it could. But just to say, straight out, well, then I'll lower the price of my house. I just found that so comical. Anyways, guys, I encourage you to look at this video or this podcast, and really, I want you to look at it with, not trying to be biased one way or the other, just really listening to what Mr. Ketchmark says, what his view is of the trial, and kind of how they went about. Because there's a lot of information here that that the um, different websites that covered the trial didn't get into. Because I felt like they kind of they talked about things in a manner that's a little bit more favorable to their readership. And these particular periodicals, Inman and these real estate news organizations, they were kind of portray things in a certain light that apparently wasn't the case. And some YouTube channels that did the same thing. They when they were following the trial, but it definitely gives you insight into their perspective as far as the plaintiffs, and kind of where their logic was and kind of what information they were relying on in order to make their case. And I think it's very important that agents and people in the industry look at this with an I don't want to necessarily say an open mind, although you kind of do want to be open-minded, but you want to be from the perspective of that you want to kind of understand the perspective, even though you may not agree with it, because I certainly didn't agree with everything that he said in the trial, or that said in this podcast. But you want to look at it that way and not be so judgmental, emotional. Just listen to it for what it is and try and glean what information you can out of it, because I think it'll give us a little bit of perspective of what may be coming with these other trials, and I think also what the landscape may look like once all is said and done. So anyways, guys, this is Ben the Real Estate Pro. Hopefully you enjoyed this video. This was a little bit of a long one, but I think there was a lot of good information here, and be sure to check out the podcast and, go back by and watch them some more from time to time. All right, guys. This is Ben the Real Estate Pro. I'll talk to you later. Bye.